Welcome to Sunday Jesus Service. I'm Israel Anderson. And today we're going to look at a couple of different things and just talk about some things as well. A little bit of serendipity tonight. So, words to learn. We're going to look at some original words in the Hebrew and one word in Aramaic and the Greek. And then we're going to look at some history, the history of how we got to where we are now and what might be happening in the very near future. So let's dig into this. Words to learn. What words do we need to learn? Well, I have been talking about this for a little bit, right? And let me get my cursor onto the right screen and we'll probably have more success moving that around. And we want to learn some of these words that are in your Bible. But it's funny, when we talk about the Bible, we are talking generally about an English translation of the Bible. Though there are some people, I noticed that we encountered one in some conversations, a big thread on Twitter last week, where you've got people that are King James only fanatics, and I used to be one of those people. I wouldn't touch anything but a King James Bible. And I remember when I got off the streets, I had a fellowship that rescued me when I was living on the streets, when I was 16 years old. And the Christian bookstore there, or somebody in the fellowship organized to get me this really nice King James Bible. I was so happy with that. But today, the King James, I guess, is good to look at for purposes to see what was happening back in the 1600s, and to see, how they were thinking about things and translating things. But our modern Bible translations are a lot better than anything that the King James has. But King James people, some of them, I guess not all of them, but some of them would say that the King James Bible corrects the Hebrew and the Greek and the Aramaic. For real, that's what they say. That an English translation created in 1611 at the behest of Empire, King James translation, got his name on it. It's got the name of a king on it, the name of Empire, the vestige of the Roman Empire. Some things to think about there. And the modern translations are actually doing a much, much better job. We've got the Net Bible with those translator notes. Many of you have purchased that translation, and I thoroughly recommend it. It's not perfect, but it's the best thing that exists out there. Now, if you want probably the most accurate translation, you'd be looking at the NRSV updated edition, UE. They put that suffix on the end of that, NRSV UE for updated edition. And that is more of closer to a mechanical translation, more of a word-for-word translation, a little bit harder to read. But only the Net Bible comes with these incredible translator notes. And those translator notes are great because there's not a commentary. It's not like a study Bible. It's just the translation, and the translators have included their notes on how and why they translate difficult passages. And as if you've been around here for any length of time, there's a lot of difficult passages in the text that have been translated many different ways because of theological assumptions and supporting dogma and things like that. And so what we want to do is learn Hebrew and Greek. Now, that's not for everybody, but if you're interested in that, I so strongly encourage it. But there are a handful of words in the original languages that we do want to learn. And even if you just have a basic rudimentary definition of these words, it'll help you to look through the English translation, because the English translations that we have, it's like a Muslim will tell you that you can't read the Quran except in Arabic. and the translations just don't do it justice. You haven't read the Quran unless you've read it in Arabic. Okay. You know, even though I've never heard any Christian say that about the Bible, it sort of rings true with the Bible as well, that if you really want to understand, you're going to have to read it in the original languages. And that means learning some original languages, some, at least starting off with some words. So let's dive into it. We're going to learn one Aramaic word, and we're going to learn a few Hebrew words and a few Greek words. And with these words, we will start to increase our understanding of what the text actually says. I just realized I'm going to have to do that to all of them, but that's fine. All right. So our Hebrew words, 4 of them today. You're probably familiar with all of them. Now, I clipped a whole bunch out. I'm going to expand this, but just for today's presentation, I cut a bunch out and move them off screen here, and we'll learn more over time. And we'll probably do a video that goes more and more into some of these words because they really are important. But here's the ones that we should learn from today. And we're going to start with El. El, what does El mean? Well, we've probably heard of this. It's translated most often as God in the Bible. And that's basically what it means. Of course, we've talked about the usage of the word God, and we have a study called Lost in Translation, from Elohim to God. That's another word that's translated into God. And you start to see, well, El's translated in God, Elohim is translated into God. And so that's why we want to actually learn a little bit about these words. Let me just get this off so we get rid of our underlines because they're not incorrectly spelled. So let's get that all on screen. El. This is a general word for God or mighty one. And that is probably a much better term to use instead of God. People are always going to use God. I'm going to continue to use the word God in casual conversation. But once we start getting down to brass tacks and looking at words, and we really need to differentiate. And the way we would differentiate is, instead of just having all of these, like there's 2 words here that we just translate into God, but they have slightly different, well, actually, they're not slightly different, they have different meanings. So when they're translated into our Bible and they just give us God, okay, is that El? Is that Elohim? What is going on here? And that's why we need to learn these. So El, a general word for God or mighty one, a singular term for God used throughout the Hebrew Bible and wider Semitic texts, sometimes a generic title, other times a specific deity, including the high god of the Canaanite pantheon, appears in compound names like El Aljon or El Shaddai, distinct from the plural Elohim, and sometimes used in contrast to Yahweh. Okay? Elohim. Well, this is a word we talk about, we use an awful lot. A word that means gods, but is often translated as God, and we decide that based on context. A grammatically plural Hebrew word meaning gods, plural, or divine beings, used with both singular and plural verbs depending on context. Can refer to the creator group in Genesis 1, in the beginning, Elohim. Can refer to members of the divine council, foreign gods, spirits, or Yahweh himself. Of course, Yahweh likes to use that term, Yahweh Elohim. We could say, it's not really a name, but it became a name. Yahweh divine council member, and that's one way to look at it. Requires contextual judgment to determine its usage. So we've looked at Psalm 82. Let's not just breeze through these. Let's take a look at a couple of examples where we see this. So we'll see this here in Psalm 82. Elohim stands in the assembly of El. So right there we've got the 2 words we've just looked at. In the midst of the gods, he renders judgment. So is the gods, which is obviously plural here, how does that differ from this word God, which is obviously singular? Well, they don't. If I click on here, you'll see this is Elohim. And if I click on the plural word, we'll see this too is Elohim. Okay, so in one sentence in the Bible, we have this example. So there's no arguing or debate over this. It is plural in the common sense, the common usage of the word. I think the Strong's Concordance says in the ordinary sense. And then depending on the context, it will become a singular. And that is determined here by this sentence. Elohim stands in the assembly of El, and so translators and I agree that that's an individual, and so we translate it as a singular there, all right? So El and Elohim, two words that are used in Psalm 82. And of course, we could go over to Genesis and we'll see that, but I'm sure I've shown you that a lot of times lately, so we'll skip looking at Genesis for now anyway. The next one we want to learn is Aljon. Now, we will go and look at where this is used, obviously in the Song of Moses, where Moses is giving a deathbed confession and telling people what happened to the inheritance that was given to Yahweh. So, Aljon, a title meaning Most High. So there is nobody above Aljon. Aljon, South Korean guy. Aljon is the absolute head of everything, the top, the Most High. There is nobody above Aljon. Now, of course, Yahweh also claims a few times in the Old Testament to be Aljon, as he would do. And yet we're about to see a passage, or I have it in the definition there, where we see that Aljon is giving an inheritance to his son Yahweh, and that inheritance is Jacob, Israel, the Hebrews. Aljon is a Hebrew title meaning Most High, used for a supreme divine figure. Appears independently or paired with other names, including El and Elohim, in Deuteronomy 32:8, which we're about to look at here. And these abbreviations are good to learn as well. Maybe we should do a little video on these abbreviations. So the LXX here is shorthand for the Septuagint. Okay, so this is 70 in Roman numerals. L being 50, and then 2 tens gives you 70. So that Septuagint is the Greek translation of Hebrew texts that is often used, and the DSS stands for the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so what I'm talking about here is in Deuteronomy 32:8, in the Septuagint and in the Deep Sea Scrolls, Aljon divides the nations and assigns them to other Elohim, marking him as a superior to Yahweh who receives Israel as his portion. And we can see that here. So here's the Song of Moses. This is a deathbed confession from Moses after he has relayed all of this information in this chapter. Yahweh walks him up to Mount Nebo and kills him. So this is what he says. Remember the ancient days, bear in mind the years of past generations. Ask your father and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up humankind. He set the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the heavenly assembly or divine council. For, and we're about to get to Yahweh here, so we'll get into this, but for the Lord's allotment, Yahweh's allotment, this word here is Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, Yod-Heh-Vah-Heh. Why do we do this? Why do we take the name and turn it into something that it doesn't even mean. Yahweh doesn't mean the Lord. There's no serious scholar who's not a Christianity apologist who would argue with that. For Yahweh's allotment is his people. Jacob is his special possession. This is one of those passages that our critics don't want to entertain. They don't like what it says. They just try to dismiss it. But it's very, very plain, very clear. Moses is giving some information. He knows he's about to be killed by Yahweh. He knows that because he just had to help Yahweh with killing his own brother just before this. We don't know exactly how long, probably about 6 or 8 weeks before Moses is relaying this information. He was asked by Yahweh to come with his brother Aaron and go up another mountain, and Moses undressed his brother, which is a disgusting thing to do for a younger brother, to see his older brother naked, undressed, and then they left after Yahweh had killed Aaron. And Christianity likes to soften these things and say, make up all kinds of stories and try to gloss it over. But the reality is Yahweh kills Aaron and then kills Moses right after he tells us this. A very interesting sequence of events. That's why context is so important. If you're not looking at not just the original languages, but the sequence of events, what's actually going on in the big story, what happened chapters before and all of this kind of stuff, books before even when we're discussing Torah, if we don't have that context, then we don't have the context. And it's always a continuing mission to discover deeper and deeper context as we go on. So that is Aljon. Aljon gave to Yahweh. And then we have the word Yahweh, which is our last Hebrew word today. The personal name of Israel's national God, the proper name of the deity who claims Israel as his possession, first appears in Genesis 2:4. Genesis 2:4. I guess I have to silence everything there. Distinct from the Elohim of Genesis 1, often rendered as the Lord in English Bibles, which obscures the name. Associated with covenant law, testing, and judgment, the name is not used in the New Testament at all. That is interesting. Now, so many rabbit holes we go down right now. But it is interesting, a couple of things, that when we're looking back here at the Song of Moses and we're looking at this whole scene here, Yahweh murders Moses and buries him in an unmarked grave so nobody can find it. Doesn't want him to be glorified by the people. Doesn't want the people to turn him into a shrine, or so. That's a lot of the arguments that are used. And yet, right before Jesus is about to walk into Jerusalem to be put on trial and crucified, he stands before the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. Well, Elijah was caught up. He never died. Well, that's very interesting. And then Moses was murdered. So how did Moses get to be standing next to Jesus? Is the gospel correct when it's saying that? How can that possibly be? Moses was buried by Yahweh. But then we read in Jude, this is so crazy. The pieces fit together so well. It's bizarre that Christianity has just ignored this. It's not that people haven't seen this. Of course they have. But if you talk about it, then you get, treated like I get treated. You're not allowed to talk about it. You've got to maintain the cult's beliefs at all costs. But here we see in Jude where the archangel Michael was arguing with the devil over the body of Moses. Who knew where Moses' body was? Who's the only person who knew where Moses' body was? Isn't that crazy? There's only one person. So who's the devil in Jude being described here? I mean, all of these connections that people have to just deny and deny and deny. And Yahweh, when we look at when Yahweh gives this "I will be who I will be" response to Moses, this is around the burning bush event. He gives him this phrase, "I will be who I will be," which over time became "I am who I am," which is not what he said, right? So this whole John 8:58 thing doesn't work at all. Well, Jesus said, "I am." Well, that's great, but Yahweh didn't, so it's kind of irrelevant. So what an interesting thing. So there's that. Moses ends up there. Then Yahweh's name is never used in the New Testament. And people will say, well, but at that time, in Second Temple Judaism, they were moving away from saying the name, and they would just say Hashem, another Hebrew word, which means the name. And so they would say Hashem instead of Yahweh. But at one point, they absolutely said Yahweh. Now, we've found some old texts with Yahweh on them, and they have vowel markers on them. And so scholarship definitely over the last decade has been leaning more and more towards those manuscripts being accurate. And that would mean that as best we can tell from the vowel markers, because Hebrew has vowel markers sometimes, but for an experienced Hebrew reader, you don't need the vowel markers because you see the words. And so if we were to take all the vowels out of English words, you probably would still be able to work it out, right? You as an English reader. Whereas someone who's not familiar, not fluent with English would be like, I don't know what's going on here. So these old manuscripts with the vowel markers means that Yahweh's name, I thought I silenced all you, that it should be pronounced Yehovah. Yehovah. Not Jehovah. So the JWs get that awfully incorrect because there was no J sound. There was no J sound. J sound, it came much, much later. So Yehovah. Now we say Yahweh because that is the scholarly recognized way of pronouncing the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh. So a lot of people get really caught up on how you pronounce certain names, and I used to think that really mattered a lot too. Not anymore, because it just doesn't. Okay, one Aramaic word. Can you guess what that is? You must know what that word is, surely. What Aramaic word are we going to be looking at today in these few words that we're going to learn? And of course, some of you have already got it and you know what it is. I wish I could see some chat live here or something, but that is going to be the word Abba. Abba. What does Abba mean? So there are three languages that make up the Bible, the original, the oldest and best manuscripts that we have, the original Bible in the original languages. Hebrew and Greek, and a very tiny splattering of Aramaic in both the Old and the New Testaments. Okay? And of course, well, this is the example in the New Testament where Jesus uses Abba, but this is an Aramaic word. And he would have spoken Aramaic. Aramaic is extremely similar to Hebrew, as you can see here. Abba, those are Hebrew characters, aren't they? Yes, but they're Aramaic characters too. The languages are very close to each other. It's a little bit like Cantonese and Chinese, simplified Chinese. There's an enormous amount of crossover, but there are some distinctions. And so Jesus uses this word to describe his Father. Abba is a direct familiar form of father used in personal address. Found in a few key New Testament passages, as you can see there, where it appears alongside pater to emphasize closeness and trust. Unlike Yahweh, Abba is never linked to law, contract, or national identity, only relationship. Okay. And of course, we're going to look at Pata, aren't we? Didn't I put Pata here? I think we did. Yep, we did. Oh, we're going to look at a whole bunch here. All right. Let me just shrink all these down to begin with. So now we're going to look at some Greek words. Theos, logos, pyrezo, pata. Not to be confused with, see, this is the same thing. So in Latin, the word for father is what? Pater. Same word. Okay, so Greek and Latin, the word for father is identical. And that's a little bit like how we have with Hebrew and Aramaic. So pater, diabolos. Well, I think most of you know what diabolos means. It's used to be more common in culture to use diabolos. Numa. Bit of an in joke there. Some will get it. And Isus. What's Isus? Well, we'll get to it. Some of you know, some of you don't. Oh, I was going to say, where's my definition gone? I love you guys. I love you guys so much. Sorry if I feel a little casual today. I'm just very relaxed and calm and not rushed. And I just feel like hanging out with you and learning a few things together. And, you know, this isn't going to kind of stick, I understand, but we're going to keep reinforcing these words all the time. Whenever we see them in the text, we're going to call them out and go, this word is Theos. This word is Pyzo. And so that we can start to learn what the underlying word means of these very important words. And as I said, I clipped a whole bunch out, and we'll get to more, but I think these are the most important ones that we should know. Theos. Theos is all through the New Testament, the Greek word for God or deity. A Greek noun meaning God or deity, used in both singular and plural forms. In the New Testament, it can refer to different beings depending on context, including the Father, Yahweh, and occasionally other figures. Also used in the Septuagint to translate Hebrew terms like El, Elohim, and Aljon. Context determines which is being meant. Okay? Now, this kind of illustrates the point, right? Also used in the Septuagint to translate Hebrew terms like El, Elohim, and Aljon. So when you get these three words, El, Elohim, and Aljon, which all mean totally different things, and you reduce them down to just one word, what are you doing? I mean, that's corruption, actually. Like you know, every word that we use was made up by somebody at one point. Every single word in every single language. At some point, somebody made that word up. And so if we don't have words in the Greek that correspond to El, Elohim, and Aljon, then what should have happened is they should have invented a new Greek word that was a direct match for El, Elohim, and Aljon. There's nothing to stop us from doing that. That's totally okay. Every single word that I'm saying right now was made up by somebody at one point. Okay? And so there's nothing wrong with making up a new word. And that is what should have been done, because this is like whitewashing all of the meaning. And then people use the Septuagint to translate into English. That's happening less and less now as we're relying more on like the Dead Sea Scrolls and Hebrew manuscripts instead. But we shouldn't be creating an English translation from a translation of the Hebrew. That's a two-step translation. That's terrible at that point, okay? I mean, it's bad enough trying to translate from the Hebrew into English, but then to translate Hebrew into Greek, and then the Greek into English, and then people become strong textualists. They'll say, well, the etymology of this word means such and such, so we have to translate it that way. without regard for the original context of that word. That really becomes a problem. I guess the sun is setting and it's cooling, and I'm going to turn my AC down a bit. So, Theos. We'll see this in different passages. Maybe we'll go look at one. We're going to look at Logos here. Let's look at Logos first, and then we'll go look at an example of those two words used together. Logos. Now, you've heard this word, of course. I mean, you can't be in Christianity very long without hearing the term Logos. A word meaning word, message, or reason. A flexible term used in Greek literature and philosophy to mean word, speech, reason, or account. In the New Testament, it refers to both human communication and divine expression. In John 1:1, it is used to identify Jesus as the personal embodiment of divine speech or message. And we're working on a new translation. We keep getting asked, and I'm so happy that people really want an unbiased translation. We're working on that for you. But let's take a look at this. So this is John 1:1, and this sentence here uses these two words that we just learned here. So the Logos and Theos. So these two words, Theos and Logos, are used here in John 1:1. Now you see the way that we translate it here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was fully God. Okay, that word fully is not in the Greek. That was added by the Net Bible. They should not have done that. And I hope when they do an update, they will actually get rid of this word fully. See, I'm clicking on it and nothing is coming up like if I clicked on here and we get Logos, because that word fully is not in the Bible. It's an addition. We've got to be really careful with things like this because they're changing the meaning. We translate from the Hebrew into the Greek Septuagint and then back into English. We're running into trouble. We're running into trouble here as well when we don't retain the word Theos, but instead use this word God. And we have to have a translation that stops translating these words, but retains them as what we call a transliteration, where we're getting the word in its original language and sounding it out in English characters. So in other words, we shouldn't change Logos here, this word, and capitalized, shouldn't be capitalized, is Logos. But how should this, man, we could spend a long time on this. This passage is one of the most abused passages in the entire Bible. It is one of the most proof-texted verses, ripped out of its context, isolated, and turned into dogma and doctrine. And we have been doing that a long, long time. And we need to get back to more of an originalist perspective, where we want to bring the real context back. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to have to learn a few new words. Or we'd have to invent words, and maybe we should. So in the beginning was and of course in the beginning, well, that's an allusion, not an illusion, but an allusion back to Genesis 1. In the beginning. What does Genesis mean? Well, that's the English word we translate the Hebrew word Bereshit into. Bereshit, Genesis. What does that mean? What does the word Bereshit mean? Beginnings. Okay, so in the beginning was the Logos. The message. The message. In the beginning was the message. And the message was with Theos. With Theos. Okay? and the message was Theos. Now, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and this is why people have invented things like the Trinity. If you understand the divine council and the plurality of the divine council, then this makes a lot more sense. If we get this word Elohim, which we translate into Theos, and realize that's what's being talked about here, the context has been set. We know this is an allusion to Genesis. We know what happened in Genesis. We have the Elohim creating everything, creating humankind. In the Genesis was the message, and the message was with Theos, and the message was Theos. Now, if we were to revert that word Theos back into Elohim, then it would make slightly more sense. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with Elohim, and the word was, and the Logos was Elohim, the message. So in the beginning was the message, and the message was with Elohim, and the message was Elohim. Now, in the context, the perspective of the divine council, this now makes perfect sense. The Father is Elohim. We saw that just in Psalm 82, where he's standing before his council, and he is called Elohim. And he's speaking to what? The Elohim. So Jesus is an Elohim. He was there with the Father. In fact, Jesus was the architect of creation. He's the one actually doing the work, real work, physical work, in creating everything that we see all around us. But now it doesn't seem to fit if we translate it like that, because we're personifying this word message. Well, John, or whoever wrote John, is personifying Logos here. Well, this is very unusual. This is not the way that you would normally speak in Greek. So we are taking a word that doesn't mean messenger, but that's how we would personify message. You've got a message, and the personification of that is going to be messenger. We would need to change this, and there's always going to be debate over this, but I think that's what John's intent here is. This is the message personified. And then we would read this, in the beginning was the messenger, and the messenger was with Theos, with Elohim, with the Father or with the divine council, either one works fine. And the messenger was Elohim, was Theos. Well, now it makes sense. And to my Greek scholars out there, you will say, oh, that is terrible grammar. You can't translate that word logos as messenger. No, not according to Greek grammar rules, we can't. But if we're understanding the context of what John is trying to convey here, he's saying that the message of the Father, the good news, the gospel, the message of the Father is personified in an individual. And that individual was with the divine council in the beginning and is a divine council member. He was with Elohim and he is Elohim. So there we see Theos and Logos used in the same sentence. And as you start to dig into these, and this is very superficial, you start to see, well, wait, how do we translate these texts? Oh, yes, not easy. That's why you get a Net Bible with the translator notes that will give you some insight with some of these difficult passages where Bible translators really wrestle with how to translate things. Look at the translator notes in the Net Bible for Genesis 1:26. This is where it says, then Elohim said, let us create humankind in our image, in our likeness. Well, how do you translate that Elohim there? Because if we just bring that up, you're left with a problem because the passage suggests plurality. Then Elohim said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. how can we translate this first word as a singular when the rest of the sentence is grammatically plural? Well, that doesn't work. Now, maybe it works if you're saying, well, this Elohim here is being used like we just saw over in Psalm 82, where it was used as a singular, right? Elohim, God, stands in the assembly of El. So maybe that's what's happening here as well. And you'll see in the translated notes, the plural form of the verb has been the subject of much discussion through the years, and not surprisingly, several suggestions have been put forward. Many Christian theologians interpret it as an early hint of plurality within the Godhead, etc., etc. This is not evidence of any Trinity. There's no concept of any Trinity in the Old Testament or the New Testament. But here we could justifiably, and this is what it actually says. If you read those notes in the Net Bible, the translators are laying out the case that this probably should be rendered as a plural. Then the gods said, let us make humankind in our image and our likeness. Us, our. We've got these three plurals. Us, our. So why can't we translate then the gods, plural, said? Well, we could. But it is fine as it is, because we can say, well, it's addressing the Father. And the reality is we don't know one way or the other. Is it addressing the Father, or is it addressing the whole divine council? We don't know. And both renderings work. So you can go either way here. Then God said, let us, or then the gods said, let us. And even if you want to say, then God said is the right rendering, but he's still in the divine council with the other divine council members, and we can see that because of the plurality of the entire thing here. So it's still justifiable, even if you want to make the argument that it has to be singular, it can still be plural, because it's still a singular person in the divine council. They're all Elohim. And this word Elohim has been so abused. It's not a word that a lot of people use correctly, and they want to invent all kinds of interesting ideas about Elohim. Both Christians and Gnostics and others, they all want to reinvent the word Elohim in their making, but it's actually really quite simple. And we have so many different examples throughout the text of it used in both singular and plural fashion that we have a pretty reasonable idea, and we don't need to invent new meanings and understandings. So let's get back to the next word, Pyzo. This is one of my favorite words. All right. How are we all doing? Pyzo. A word meaning to test or to tempt. And this is where we diverge the other way, and we take a Greek word and we translate it differently depending on our theological position. Let's read the rest of the definition. A Greek verb meaning to test, try, examine, or tempt, depending on context, used in both neutral and negative senses throughout the New Testament. In the Septuagint, it often translates the Hebrew nasah, especially in passages where Yahweh tests the people. I just know people see that word and they go, wait, I want to talk to you about... No, we're not going there. I'm just not going there. Appears prominently in the temptation narrative of Jesus. So we've got this word, nasah, that's used for Yahweh testing people in the Old Testament. The direct translation of nasah is pyrezo. And then we see in the Septuagint using the word pyrezo to describe Yahweh's testing in the wilderness of the Hebrews. And then we see Yahweh testing Jesus. And that whole passage there in both Matthew 4 and Luke 4, when we go through the temptation, uses this word, pyrazo, the same word used in the Greek Septuagint for Yahweh testing the Hebrews. Direct translation from Nasa into pyrazo. And then you'll get Christians that'll say, someone was arguing with me on X just earlier today, saying, you can't, or you're trying to combine testing and tempting. You see the definition here? Well, you can look it up in any Greek lexicon. It's not going to disagree with me here. I've created a simplified definition here, but it just is what it is. Pyrazo means to test and to tempt. There is no difference. Testing and tempting are synonyms. To test or to tempt, these are synonyms. And Christians, because they see the dichotomy, they see the problem, the paradox with Yahweh, testing the people, but then the devil comes along and tempts people. Okay? But the Greek word used in the Septuagint for Yahweh testing the Hebrews is pyrazo. And the Greek word used in the temptation story where Yahweh is once again, or the devil, is testing Jesus is pyrazo. Okay, so it's exactly the same word. There is no distinction between testing and tempting. They are the same thing. Okay? A lot of people don't want to accept that because they've tried to create this theological divide where, oh, no, Yahweh was testing the people, but Satan, he comes and tempts people. Yahweh pyrazoed people and the devil pyrazos people. Same exact word. And then you get the passage from, James 1:3, where, is that right? James 1:3, where it says, Theos does not pyrazo anyone. What is that talking about? Theos, in this case, obviously the Father, Abba Father, does not test or tempt anyone. This is why in the Good Father discourse with the Lord's Prayer, Jesus once again is talking about not leading people into a time of testing, but to deliver them from the evil one. It's all the same word. Christianity wants to convince you, no, they're different words. No, they're not. This is really a tough one for some people to accept. But I'm not making any mistake here. And, there's a vast chasm between what Christian apologists teach about the text and what scholars teach about the text. And I am making that shift from being that Christian apologist that I was all my life to being a scholar, to using scholarly principles to understand things, not religious dogma, not defending a religious system. Okay? But really trying to understand what things mean. Pater. Well, pater, I'm sure you know, means father. The Greek word for father, pater, the standard Greek term for a father, used broadly for biological, ancestral, or divine relationships. In the New Testament, it refers to both human fathers and to the one Jesus calls Abba. When used for God, it emphasizes relational identity rather than legal authority. How about we'll do it like that. When used for Abba, It emphasizes relational identity rather than legal authority. I still use that word God, forgive me. We will all keep using it. It's just so ingrained. It's so difficult to let go and to use other words. I mean, I could put Theos here. Abba is better because we know exactly who we're talking about. And that's the situation where Jesus uses this word, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is crying out and to his Father, praying to his Father, and he uses that term, Abba, Pater. That is where we get that term from. That's why I use that term, Abba, Pater. And then you will get, it happens all the time. It's so strange. You will get Christians ridiculing me, mocking me for using this term, Abba, Pater, because I say, it's just, you're just connecting an Aramaic word and a Greek word, and they both mean the same thing. Well, they don't mean exactly the same thing, actually, but they are very close. But this is the term Jesus used. So if you're going to mock and ridicule me, you're mocking and ridiculing Jesus because he used this term, and that's where I get it from, right? Funny. Diabolos. Diabolos. Who knows what diabolos means? I'm sure you all know what diabolos means. I'm going to get in trouble for drinking from my plastic chalice. Somebody left a comment. They weren't happy. Were disgusted I was drinking out of a plastic bottle. I'm sorry. I live in a van, and it's actually good water. So diabolos. And I literally live in a van. I'm in a van right now. You wouldn't know, huh? It's amazing what lights and a black drop sheet can do. All right, diabolos, a word meaning slanderer or accuser, which we translate. Do I not? I do. Okay. A Greek noun meaning slander or accuser, used in both secular and religious contexts for someone who brings false charges or hostile accusations. In the New Testament, it becomes a title for the being who opposes and tests, pyrazos, often translated as devil, frequently linked to the legal role of adversary, the adversary. Or we should say an adversary, instead of personifying it. There we go. So, diablos. The next word, Numa, or Numa. Okay, some of you will get that. I don't know how old you all are. Numa is breath, spirit, and it's connected. I'm getting ahead of myself. Connected to ruach, a word meaning spirit, breath, or wind. A Greek term with a range of meanings, including breath, wind, or spirit. In the New Testament, it refers to the human spirit, evil spirits, or a divine spirit, depending on context. Requires careful reading to determine whether the usage is neutral, hostile, or wholly set apart. Now, we could add the same word here, but it doesn't have as much use in Hebrew as it does in the New Testament and the Greek. So ruach is the Hebrew equivalent to pneuma. And isus. Now, what is this word? Does anybody know what this word is? So right now we're working on creating all the fundamental translation paradigms that we're going to use to create a new neutral Bible translation using the oldest and best manuscripts, not using the Septuagint, not using any of the Catholic texts, using the oldest and best manuscripts of Hebrew and Greek that we have. And this is one of the ones that I'm still unsure of. Well, let's dive into what it means, and then we can talk about it. Isus, the Greek name translated as Jesus. The Greek form of a common Hebrew name, likely Yehoshua or Yeshua, used throughout the New Testament to refer to the man from Nazareth whose life and teachings are the focus of the Gospels, just making it really plain. the fifth most common male name in Judea of the time. And I put that there because you have these people that are saying, well, doesn't this mean Yahweh saves? What's that all about? This is the fifth most common name of his era. All the boys record Jesus or Isus or Yehoshua or Yeshua. So we might want to consider that. That's essential context, right? We want to look at what Jesus actually taught, not make arguments based around what a name may or may not have been. We don't actually know for sure. Some would say we can know with some certainty, and others say we simply don't know. We're just going with what we have. Okay? So when we're creating a neutral translation of the Bible, do we use Isus or do we use Jesus? It's a question. Maybe we will. I don't know. There's many things we could do. If it was the first occurrence in a chapter, then maybe we could put Isus and then Jesus on the first occurrence in a chapter after it, so people know that it's Jesus. This is the problem with translation. It's like, what do we translate? What do we not translate? And a million other questions. Because there's no real right or wrong answers here. A lot of it is personal taste, personal preference. And so you just want to be careful. But I don't lean in either direction right now. I think a lot of people would feel it is strange to use the word Isus instead of Jesus, but that is the word in the Greek. And then there's some that say, well, you shouldn't be saying Jesus, you should be saying Yeshua. I used to say Yeshua all the time. You can go back and find tons of my videos, and you'll find comments on those videos of people saying, why aren't you using the word Jesus? You can't win. These sacred names people, they just don't let up. They're worse than King James only people, to be frank. We're going to talk about prayer soon, and one of the main things I'm going to teach you about prayer is how intention works. Because when we pray, we kind of are broadcasting an intention. And in that regard, it's not so important what a word is, in what language it is. It's the intention that is behind it, the meaning that is behind the word. So you can tell me, should we use Isus or should we use Jesus? Or maybe we should do like I'm suggesting, and after the first use in every chapter, we'll put Jesus in brackets, or maybe we'll do it the other way around. We'll put Jesus there and we'll put Isus in brackets on the first occurrence. And when you start to put together a Bible translation, then you start to see all of the problems. You start to see that there's so many questions, so many variables when you are translating from these old languages into a modern English language. So there we go. Woo! 58 minutes. I think what we're going to do here is we're going to create 2 videos tonight, but we're going to go through a little bit more yet, so hang around. But that is our words for tonight. Let me just see if I can condense all this up and put it on the screen. Then we'll move on here in just a second to the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight. We'll go through a bit of a timeline of events. So, words to learn. Let's blow these up a little bit for El. These are Hebrew words. Elohim, Aljon, Yahweh, Ruach. Well, we didn't learn that one. We'll just take that away for now. Aramaic, Abba. And then in the Greek, Theos, Logos, Pyzo, Pater, Diablos, Numa, Isus. If you start to learn these words, it's not that many. It's not even a dozen, right? What do we got? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got 1 dozen exactly. So 12 words. If you learn these words and then you're using some software where you can, do a little rollover, like here. So you can click on a word and see, well, what's this word mean? Oh, this is the word Elohim. And you start to learn and remember these definitions. And as you read through the text, then you can replace it in your head and things will start to make a lot more sense for you. Like here, then Elohim said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. That also goes right back up to Genesis 1, doesn't it? In the beginning, Elohim created. Okay, so when you start getting into deep Bible study, you'll start to learn that Bible translation is not an exact science. It's you're dealing with how to linguistically convey the message that was originally conveyed, and it's more art than science. And so, especially when you are making translation choices based upon many factors, but two of the main factors would be the etymology of a word, the history of a word, its origins, how it has changed through time, all of its history, but then also the context of how a word is used, like we just looked at in John 1:1, right? John 1:1. How do we translate the word logos there? In the beginning was the message or the messenger? Well, messenger is not grammatically correct in the Greek. So that we can't really justify it using Greek grammar to translate it as messenger, but the context, what John is clearly trying to convey in his connections to the divine council, to the plurality of the Elohim or the Theos, clearly shows that John is personifying a message in a person. Then in that case, it would be justifiable contextually, not grammatically, but contextually, to translate logos there as messenger. And some people won't like that because they're sticklers for the Greek grammar, and I get that, but context matters too, right? If we're doing like you can do a mechanical translation where you're just translating one word in Hebrew to its equivalent in English, if there is an equivalent in English. And then it's very difficult to read. For example, if you translate any modern languages, if you want to translate French into English and you just did a mechanical translation, word for word, without paying attention to the context of what is being said, then that sentence, when you read it in English after being translated from French, you're going to go, what? What is this? This doesn't make any sense. Everything's like kind of round. Shouldn't this word be at this you switch these words around, and whatnot. And that's the real issues that you run into with Bible translation. It's not an easy thing to do, but we're working on it. The Restored Context Translation, the RCT, and it will come in 2026. We're working on it, and we're going to have both AI and human scholars that are, looking over the work. It will be available for scholars to critique. It'll be online, and they will be able to submit critiques to the way that we've chosen to translate things, and we will listen to them. And if we think that their criticisms are justified and that it warrants a change, we'll do that. Bible translations go through many changes. The Net Bible is in its second or third revision right now. The God's Word translation, which I used to recommend, that has had 3 versions. I think like most of the large translations, like the NIV, even the King James Version, um, the NRSV, they go through changes over time. Scholarship is not static. It's in a process still of research and discovery and understanding. And as our context, our understanding grows, we realize things should be translated a bit differently. Perhaps we find older texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls certainly led to a lot of changes across Bible translations, especially in that passage we looked at in Deuteronomy 32, where Aljon, the Most High, gave Jacob, Israel, the Hebrews, to Yahweh, because we see that changes were made over time. The Masoretic text says something quite different. And then we found the oldest text of Deuteronomy 32 we'd ever found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Scholarship is in agreement there. And so now you find most modern Bible translation updates are updating Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, to match the Dead Sea Scrolls instead of the previous text that they were translated from. So when somebody says to you, God preserved the Bible, it's the word of God and God preserved it, and that person doesn't have a foggiest clue what they're talking about. Anyone who has even a rudimentary understanding of biblical scholarship, of Bible translation, not of trying to translate the whole Bible, just of trying to translate almost anything in the Bible, very quickly learns the history of the Bible and where it came from, and the manuscripts that we have, and the translation arguments, debates that have occurred for 2 millennia. And you realize there is no special book from God that has been preserved and all these kinds of things. That just does not exist. It just doesn't in the real world. And if you have a faith-based belief, or that's one thing, but maybe what your faith system has been telling you, teaching you, isn't actually true, or maybe it's just not as accurate as it could be, and that just kind of does away with this whole idea that God has given us some special book. No, he hasn't. There's no evidence. The Bible doesn't say that anywhere. And what the Bible does tell us is it quotes Jesus as saying that the Holy Spirit will be our primary revelation of the Father and the message that he gave to Jesus to give to us, right? So, I will ask, and my Father will send another and in my name, and he will teach you, remind you of everything that I have taught you. And okay, so the Father's Spirit, it's the Father. You can get down different layers of what you mean by the gospel and where that message came from, and it's fine to say it's Jesus' gospel, but ultimately it's not Jesus' gospel, it's the Father's gospel. Everything Jesus is telling us is what he heard from his Father, and he says that multiple times. It's the Father's gospel that Jesus is delivering. Now, Jesus is certainly doing the hard work and coming and fulfilling the law and that kind of thing. So it's fine to say it's Jesus' gospel too. Of course it is fine. But when we want to get academic about it and start to really think, well, what is the origin of this gospel? The Father. And then Jesus tells us that the same Spirit of the same Father is the one who will teach us. And we did a study a little while ago on some aspects of Jesus and the Spirit of the Father and things. I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head right now. But there when you start to look at all of these passages in the Gospels where Jesus is plainly saying that he's sent by his Father, not on his own accord, not with his own message, but with a message from his dad to give to us. Yeah. So it's the Father's gospel, ultimately. I mean, you can say it's Jesus' gospel. That's fine. You can say it's our gospel. It's our good news, right? All right, so I'm going to do something a bit different here. For those of you watching on YouTube, wondering what's going on, we're going to explore something else, and I'll upload that video separately because this is already an hour and 10 minutes long. And I want to make sure that it's not just tacked on to the end of this one. So I'm going to say goodbye to you on YouTube. Those of you on streaming on X, stick around, and we'll get straight into the rest for this evening. But let's end this one right now. Thank you so much for watching, and look for the second video that I'll upload tonight, where we're going to go through some of the history of humanity and what has happened before us and what might be happening soon. Okay? Thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.